What if the largest war ever fought on this planet left no craters, no mass graves marked on any map, because it wasn't fought between armies at all? What if it was fought between light and darkness themselves, and that war is still raging right now, inside the very soul that is listening to these words? What if the most viciously erased religion in human history wasn't erased because it was false, but because it was dangerously, unbearably true? Seekers of ancient wisdom, welcome back to the archive. Before we go one step further into the dark, I have to ask you something directly, the way a friend asks a friend, not the way an algorithm begs for engagement. If you found your way here, you are already one of the rare few who suspects the official story is missing something. So do this now, before the doubt sets back in. Press subscribe, ring that little bell, and become part of a circle that refuses to let this knowledge disappear a second time. It costs you nothing, and it means the archive survives to dig up the next buried fragment. And if even one sentence in the next 20 minutes makes the hair on your arm rise, tap that like button right where you are sitting. Consider it a small offering to the flame we are about to relight together. Today we descend into a faith so threatening that 3 empires, spanning nearly 1,000 years, and half the known world, agreed on almost nothing except this: it had to be destroyed. Rome burned its books. Persia executed its prophet in the cruelest way its law allowed. China outlawed it by name. The church that would later dominate the West spent centuries hunting down anyone suspected of still carrying its spark. We are talking about Manichaeism, the forgotten faith of the prophet Mani, a system so vast it fused Zoroastrian fire, Buddhist compassion, and Christian salvation into a single blazing cosmology of light at war with darkness. And somewhere in that war, hidden beneath layers of propaganda written by the very people who destroyed it, lies a map of your own mind that you were never supposed to find. Close your eyes for a moment, even as you listen, and let yourself walk the streets of 3rd century Mesopotamia. The air is thick with dust, spice, and the smoke of 100 competing temples. This is Babylonia under Persian rule, a crossroads where Zoroastrian fire priests, Jewish exiles, Christian ascetics, and wandering Buddhist monks from the Silk Road all breathe the same scorched air. Into this world, around the year 216, a child named Mani is born into a Jewish Christian Baptist sect called the Elchasites, a community obsessed with ritual purity, repeated washing, and secret revelation. From the very beginning, something in young Mani refuses to sit still inside their rule. At 12 years old, and again at 24, Mani claims he is visited by a divine twin, a heavenly counterpart he calls his syzygos, his spirit twin. This being does not simply comfort him, it commands him. It tells him that the sect he was raised in is incomplete, that true salvation cannot be found through ritual bathing alone, and that he, Mani, has been chosen to deliver the final, complete revelation to humanity. The last in a line that includes Zoroaster in Persia, the Buddha in India, and Jesus in Judea. Imagine the audacity and the danger of that claim. Every prophet before him had spoken to one people, in one tongue, for one age. Mani steps forward and declares himself the seal of the prophets, sent for all people, in every tongue, until the end of time. He walks away from the Elchasites. He begins to travel, and here is where the story becomes almost impossible to categorize by our modern boxes of religion. Mani travels along trade routes stretching toward India, absorbing Buddhist ideas of compassion, reincarnation, and the illusion of the material world. He studies the older Zoroastrian teachings of his Persian homeland, keeping their central image of a cosmic battle between the god of light, whom he calls the father of greatness, and the prince of darkness, ruler of a realm of chaos and matter. And he weaves in the figure of Jesus, not as a historical carpenter who bled and died on a Roman cross, but as a being of pure light who only appeared to suffer. A divine messenger whose true purpose was to awaken the sleeping sparks of light trapped inside human flesh. This is the audacious core of Mani's teaching. Before the universe as we know it existed, there was only light, ruled by the father of greatness, and darkness, ruled by a chaotic, hungry force that Mani sometimes calls the king of darkness. Darkness, driven by its own violent hunger, attacks the realm of light. To defend itself, the light sends forth primal man, who battles the forces of darkness and, in that first great cosmic war, is partially defeated, his own light particles devoured and scattered into the emerging material universe. Every star, every human soul, this world itself, is Mani's telling, is built from the wreckage of that first battle. The material universe you and I inhabit is not a neutral stage. It is a prison built from swallowed light, and the entire visible cosmos, sun and moon included, functions as a kind of vast cosmic machine, slowly filtering and lifting those trapped sparks of divinity back home. And you, listening to this now, are one of those sparks, trapped in flesh, half asleep, forgetful of your true origin. This is why Mani's missionaries did not simply preach, they awakened. Their central sacrament was not bread and wine, but gnosis, direct saving knowledge, delivered through myth, through art, through hymn, that reminded the listener, you are not merely a body. You are a fragment of a lost sun, currently disguised as a person. For a brief, astonishing window, this vision spread with a speed that terrified every established power around it. Manichaean missionaries reached Roman North Africa, Roman Egypt, Roman Spain, all the way into the Mediterranean heartland of a Christianity that had only just stopped being persecuted itself. To the east, the faith traveled the Silk Road into Central Asia, and extraordinarily, became for a time the official state religion of the Uyghur Khaganate, a Turkic empire. The only recorded instance in history of Manichaeism ever ruling as a state faith, rather than surviving underground. Manichaean communities took root as far as Western China, where, astonishingly, tiny hidden congregations are believed to have survived in the region of Fujian for centuries after the faith had been annihilated everywhere else on Earth. Some scholars tracing faint traces of Manichaean ritual echoing quietly into the 14th century, disguised inside local temple worship, but everywhere this faith touched a throne, that throne struck back. In Persia, the Zoroastrian priesthood saw Mani as a heretic, and when a new, more conservative king rose to power, Mani was arrested, chained, and left to die slowly in prison. His body reportedly flayed and displayed as a warning at the city gate of Gundishapur. His followers call this act, without a trace of metaphor, his crucifixion. In Rome, the Emperor Diocletian, in the very same years he was launching his infamous persecution of Christians, issued a separate, specific edict against the Manichaeans, condemning them as a poisonous foreign infection, ordering their leaders burned alive along with their sacred books. Centuries later, once Christianity itself had seized imperial power, the persecution sharpened rather than softened, because now the church had an insider's knowledge of exactly how dangerous this rival cosmology could be. That insider was Augustine of Hippo, who spent 9 years of his youth as a devoted Manichaean before converting and becoming one of Christianity's most influential theologians. He did not simply leave the faith behind. He turned and became its most articulate opponent, and the vocabulary he built to dismantle it would echo for centuries, resurfacing every time the church needed to identify a new outbreak of dualist heresy, and it did resurface. In the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, in the sun-drenched hills of southern France, a movement called the Cathars, or Albigensians, taught a strikingly similar doctrine, a material world created not by a loving God, but by a lesser, corrupted power, and a divine spark trapped within the human soul, waiting to be freed through knowledge rather than mere obedience. The Catholic Church, recognizing the ancient enemy wearing a new face, launched the Albigensian Crusade, an internal European holy war that slaughtered tens of thousands and gave the Western world its first formal Inquisition. An institution built explicitly to hunt the ideological ghost of Mani wherever it dared to reappear. Think about the sheer scale of that fear. A prophet born in Mesopotamia, dead for 8 centuries, still terrifying enough to justify a full crusade, and a permanent inquisitorial bureaucracy on the far side of the continent. What kind of idea earns that level of institutional dread, across cultures, across centuries, regardless of which empire holds the sword? Not folklore, not a minor cult. something that touched a nerve so central to power's control over the human mind that it had to be hunted to true extinction. Its scriptures burned so thoroughly that for most of modern history we knew Manichaeism only through the writings of its enemies. Until 20th century archaeologists finally unearthed genuine Manichaean manuscripts in the dry caves of Turfan, giving Mani, after 17 centuries of silence, the chance to speak for himself again. So why did this cosmology of light imprisoned in matter feel so threatening that empire after empire, faith after faith, agreed it needed erasing? Because a person who believes they carry a literal spark of the divine trapped inside a corrupt system does not kneel the same way. They do not obey out of fear the same way. Once a human being wakes up to their own inner light, external authority loses its final, absolute grip. That single insight, dressed in ancient cosmic language, is precisely why we now turn from history into the mind itself, because the war between light and darkness never actually left the outer world. It simply moved inside, into a language the 20th century would rediscover and call psychology. This is where the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung enters our story, though he never once, in his own writings, framed himself as reviving Manichaeism. Jung spent decades studying Gnostic texts, alchemical manuscripts, and dualist cosmologies precisely because he recognized in them something modern science had forgotten how to name: an intuitive, symbolic map of the human psyche, encoded in myth long before anyone had the vocabulary of psychoanalysis. When Mani speaks of a father of greatness, a realm of pure light, besieged by a hungry, chaotic darkness, Jung would recognize this instantly as an externalized description of the relationship between the conscious self and what he called the shadow. The disowned, repressed, often terrifying material buried in the unconscious mind. Consider it this way. Every human being is born, in Jungian terms, whole, but that wholeness fractures almost immediately under the pressure of family, culture, and survival. Traits, impulses, and desires deemed unacceptable by our environment do not vanish. They are exiled into what Jung called the personal unconscious, forming the shadow, a second self we spend a lifetime denying, projecting onto enemies, onto outsiders, onto anyone convenient, precisely so we never have to recognize it as our own. Mani's cosmic darkness, hungry, chaotic, ceaselessly attacking the light, is a near-perfect mythic dramatization of that same repressed material pressing against the boundaries of consciousness, demanding acknowledgement, refusing to simply disappear because we have decided to look away from it. And Mani's central promise, that scattered sparks of light can be gathered, purified, and returned to their source through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge rather than blind obedience, maps onto what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of integrating the shadow and the deeper archetypal layers of the collective unconscious until a person becomes a fuller, more whole version of who they already secretly were. Gnosis was never really secret information whispered between initiates in dim rooms. It was the felt recognition of one's own fractured wholeness, the moment the exiled parts of the psyche are finally seen, named, and welcomed home rather than projected outward onto a hostile world. Even Mani's layered cosmology of the sun and moon functioning as filtering stations, slowly lifting trapped particles of light back toward their source, echoes something depth psychology takes seriously. Transformation is rarely instant. Integration happens in cycles, in the slow accumulation of small, repeated moments of awareness, not one blinding epiphany. Modern neuroscience describes something structurally similar in the default mode network, the brain's background system behind our sense of a continuous self, and how contemplative practice can measurably quiet that network, dissolving, if only briefly, the boundary between self and world. Mani would have called that dissolution a glimpse of the light recognizing itself. The mechanism described may differ, but the territory being mapped, a mind touching something larger than its ordinary, fragmented sense of self, remains strikingly the same. This is precisely why Manichaeism could not survive as institutional dogma, while somehow finding a form of quiet resurrection within psychology. Its literal cosmology, angels, demons, a physical father of greatness seated somewhere beyond the stars, could not withstand the scientific revolutions that followed it. But its underlying architecture, the recognition of an internal war between an authentic, luminous core self and a shadowed, conditioned, fear-driven self, turned out to be something close to a psychological constant. Rediscovered again and again across cultures that had never heard Mani's name, because it was never really about Persia or Rome or the 3rd century at all. It was, and remains, a description of what it feels like to be a conscious mind, aware of its own darkness, aching toward its own light. So how does a modern seeker actually put any of this to use, beyond simply admiring it as beautiful ancient poetry? Mani's followers were divided into 2 tiers: the elect, who practiced strict asceticism, and the hearers, ordinary people living full worldly lives, who supported the elect and practiced a gentler daily discipline. You do not need to renounce the world to walk this path. You need only borrow their core technology of attention. Here is a practice drawn directly from that architecture, one you can begin tonight. Before sleep, in a quiet space, sit for a few minutes and mentally divide your day into 2 columns, without judgment, the way an old Manichaean scribe might have separated light from darkness in a sacred text. In one column, place every moment today when you acted from your clearest, most awake, most generous self, the moments that felt, however briefly, like truth. In the other column, place every moment you acted from fear, from old conditioning, from a reactive, smaller version of yourself, the parts you might normally rush to excuse or forget. Do not punish yourself for what lands in the second column. Mani's entire cosmology insists that darkness is not defeated through shame or denial, only through recognition, only through the light actively, patiently seeing it. The simple, repeated act of naming these 2 forces inside a single day is, in essence, a private gnosis ritual, a small nightly gathering of your own scattered sparks. You can extend this into a longer practice across the coming week. Choose one specific pattern in your shadow column, a recurring fear, a habitual defensiveness, an old wound that keeps reacting on your behalf without your conscious permission, and instead of fighting it directly. Simply observe it the way Mani's sun and moon are said to patiently, continuously filter light from matter, without violence, without haste. Ask this pattern, silently, what it once protected you from. You will often find that even your darkest, most shameful reflex began as a form of self-preservation, a spark of light that got buried under an old necessity to survive. Recognizing that origin does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does begin to dissolve the shame that keeps a pattern locked in darkness, unseen, unintegrated, endlessly repeating. At work, in relationships, in the quiet architecture of your own private thoughts, this same principle applies. Ask, before reacting to conflict, which force is currently speaking through you, the reactive, frightened, defensive darkness, or the clear, grounded, generous light. You will not always choose light. No serious mystic across any tradition has ever claimed that. But the simple act of asking the question, again and again, day after day, is precisely the slow filtration Mani described, the sun and moon of your own attention, gradually, patiently gathering your scattered sparks and lifting them home. This is the entire secret that 3 empires spent centuries trying to erase. A human being who knows, in their bones, that they carry something of the light within them, becomes very difficult to permanently control through fear alone. Every institution that burned Mani's books, flayed his body, hunted his Cathar descendants across the hills of France, was reacting, whether consciously or not, to the same underlying threat. An awakened population is a population no empire can fully own. And this, seekers, is exactly why this circle exists, why the archive keeps digging where others have stopped looking. If tonight's descent into Mani's forbidden cosmology moved something in you, do not let it end here. Subscribe now if you have not already, because the next fragment we recover may be the one you have been quietly searching for your whole life without knowing its name. Like this video, share it with the one person in your circle who always asks the uncomfortable questions, and leave a comment before you close this tab, because this archive is not built for passive spectators. It is built by and for an awakened, exclusive circle of seekers who choose to participate rather than merely watch. So here is your question for tonight, and I want you to sit with it before you answer, the way Mani's own hearers were asked to sit with their private reckoning at the close of each day. If a fragment of ancient, divine light truly does live somewhere inside you, buried under years of conditioning, fear, and inherited darkness, what is the one thing in your life right now that it would ask you to finally stop excusing? Leave your honest answer below. And if these words traveled with you all the way to this final sentence, prove it. Write these 4 words in the comments, exactly as spoken. I carry the spark. Until the next fragment is unearthed, stay awake, stay curious, and remember, the light was never lost. It was only ever waiting to be recognized. This has been the Enchanted Archive.